I flew all the way from South Africa to London, filled with excitement to meet my first grandchild, the little one I had dreamed of holding for months. My name is Mbeki, and at 62, my heart was bursting with love as I anticipated this moment. But when I arrived at the hospital, I found myself left alone in the waiting room, a world away from the miracle unfolding just beyond those sterile walls. I felt the weight of loneliness settle in, as if the very air around me conspired to keep me at a distance from the family I longed to embrace. Before I begin, thank you for being here and for sharing in this journey with me. If you understand the power of love, resilience, and the complexities of family, you are in the right place. Please let me know in the comments where you're listening from, it means so much to me. Now, let me tell you what happened next. I remember the day I booked my flight to see my daughter, Zanil, like it was a dream I was afraid would slip away before it came true. My name is Mbeki, and at 62, I live in Johannesburg, South Africa, with memories that fill my home and heart. For months, I had been counting down the days, the hours, even the minutes until I would hold my first grandchild in my arms. The thought of flying halfway across the world, across oceans and time zones, to be part of this miracle filled me with a joy so profound it was almost painful. Zanil and her husband, Saifo, had moved to London 5 years ago. They built a life far from the dusty streets and warm sunlight of my city, chasing dreams that seemed distant to me but real and urgent to them. Though the miles stretched between us like an ocean of silence, my love for them never wavered. Every phone call, every message, every photo shared was a thread keeping us connected. When Zanil told me she was pregnant, I felt a happiness that made the earth beneath me seem lighter, as if the very air had been blessed. But this trip meant more than just crossing continents. It meant sacrifice. I am a retired schoolteacher, living on a modest pension that barely stretches to cover emergencies, let alone international travel. For months, I worked extra hours tutoring local children, saving every rand I could spare. I sold some of my cherished belongings, things I had kept since my own children were small, a traditional bead necklace from my grandmother, a hand-woven basket from my village market. I told myself this was worth it, that no price was too high to be there when my grandchild was born. The day before I left, I sat by the window, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across my modest home, and I packed my suitcase with trembling hands. I folded the baby clothes I had bought in secret, tiny socks, soft blankets, and a hat knitted by my sister. I packed photographs, too, pictures of Zanil as a child, her first day of school, her graduation day. These were tokens of the life we shared, now packed tightly inside the small bag I carried toward a new chapter. On the plane, I felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. The hum of the engines was like a lullaby that rocked me between worlds, the familiar and the unknown. I thought about the moment I would finally meet this little one, the first grandchild I had dreamed of for so long. I imagined the tiny fingers curling around mine, the soft coos and cries that would fill the room. I imagined Zanil's smile, radiant and tired, holding her child close, and Saifo standing proudly by her side. As the hours stretched on, I looked out the window at the vast clouds beneath us, each one a promise of the life waiting below. I thought about the sacrifices I'd made, the quiet moments of loneliness when I wondered if I was doing the right thing. But I pushed those doubts away, focusing instead on the warmth that awaited me. I was going to be a grandmother, a new role that filled me with purpose and hope. I had planned everything meticulously. I had booked a modest hotel near the hospital, one that would not drain my savings but offered a safe place to rest. I had spoken to Zanil just days before the trip, her voice trembling with emotion as she told me how much she wanted me there. I had reminded her that no matter the distance, family was the foundation of everything, the roots that held us steady in storms. When the plane finally touched down, my heart fluttered like a bird breaking free from its cage. The air was colder here, sharper than the warm Johannesburg breeze I was used to. The city was a whirlwind of unfamiliar sights and sounds, taxis honking, strangers rushing past, neon signs blinking in the dusk. I clutched my bag tightly, feeling both small and brave in this vast, new world. I took a deep breath, steadying myself with the thought that soon I would be reunited with my daughter. I had carried her in my womb, nurtured her through every childhood illness and triumph, and now I was flying across continents to stand by her side as she brought new life into the world. It was a sacred duty, a blessing, and a dream I would hold close no matter what awaited me. The taxi ride from the airport to the hotel was a blur of grey buildings and bustling streets. I tried to memorize the faces of the people passing by, the glint of shop windows, the rhythm of the city that would become my temporary home. I felt a pang of homesickness, but it was quickly replaced by a fierce determination. I was here, and I would be present. I would be the grandmother my grandchild deserved. That night, in the quiet of my small hotel room, I laid out the clothes and gifts I had brought. I touched the soft fabric of the blankets and whispered prayers for the baby's health and happiness. I thought of Zanil, of her strength and courage, and I whispered a promise to stand by her, no matter what. As sleep finally claimed me, I dreamed of holding that tiny hand, of the life that was about to begin. I was ready for this journey, ready to embrace whatever came next. I was Standing Becky, a grandmother filled with love, hope, and the courage to cross worlds for family. The morning light filtered weakly through the thin curtains of my hotel room, casting pale shadows on the unfamiliar walls. I woke with a flutter of nerves and excitement twisting in my chest. Outside, the city stirred to life with the hum of traffic and distant voices, a constant reminder that I was far from the warm embrace of Johannesburg. London was cold, both in weather and in feeling, a place that buzzed with energy but left me feeling strangely alone. I pulled on my coat, its fabric stiff and unfamiliar, and stepped outside into the grey chill. The streets were a maze of stone and glass, reflections bouncing off wet pavements slick with recent rain. People hurried past, bundled against the cold, their faces blank or busy, their steps brisk and purposeful. I clutched my small bag tighter, feeling like a stranger in a world that moved too fast for me to keep up. The hospital where Zanil was to give birth was a sprawling, modern building that loomed against the sky like a fortress. Its glass facade gleamed coldly, and the automatic doors whooshed open and shut with mechanical precision. I felt a shiver run through me, not just from the temperature, but from the unfamiliarity of it all. In Johannesburg, hospitals were places of warmth and community, where family gathered and stories passed like light through the rooms. Here, everything seemed clinical, distant, and impersonal. I checked into a modest hotel nearby, chosen carefully so I could be close but not overwhelmed by expense. The room was small, functional, with a single bed and a window that looked out onto a narrow alley. There was no warmth in the decor, no hint of the life I had left behind. I unpacked the few belongings I had brought, the baby clothes, the photographs, the gifts, and arranged them carefully on the bed. Each item was a thread connecting me to Zanil and the child I had yet to meet, a way to bring a piece of home into this foreign place. As I settled in, I tried to push away the growing sense of unease. I reminded myself that this was temporary, that soon I would be wrapped in the love of my daughter's new family, cradling the baby and sharing in the joy that had carried me across continents. But the hospital's cold presence hung over me like a shadow, a silent barrier between my hopes and the reality I faced. The next day, I made my way to the maternity ward, my heart pounding with anticipation. The hospital corridors were long and sterile, the walls painted in shades of white and pale blue that seemed designed to erase any hint of warmth. Nurses hurried past, their faces focused and distant, their eyes flicking over me without recognition. I asked politely at the reception desk if I could be near my daughter during labor, my voice soft but steady. The woman behind the counter gave me a curt smile and handed me a visitor's badge, directing me to a waiting area. When I arrived, I found a small room with hard plastic chairs and a single window overlooking a parking lot. The walls were bare, the air stale and cold. I sat down, clutching my hands in my lap, trying to steady the trembling that threatened to overtake me. All around me, life was moving on without me. I was supposed to be here for the miracle of birth, yet I felt like an outsider, a shadow waiting in a place where shadows were unwelcome. I tried to call Zanil, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I left messages, my voice thick with emotion, telling her I was here and ready to support her. But the silence that followed was deafening. I began to wonder if I had misread the situation, if my presence was not as wanted as I had believed. The sacrifices I had made, the long flight and the loneliness, suddenly felt like a heavy burden I carried alone. The hours stretched on, each minute a slow drip of hope and doubt. Nurses passed by with brisk efficiency, their eyes avoiding mine. I smiled at one, a small gesture of kindness, but it was met with a polite nod and a quick retreat. The waiting room was filled with the sterile smell of antiseptic, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the distant cries of babies I could not see. I felt invisible, a spectator at a moment I had dreamed of my whole life. In the quiet moments, I thought of home, the dusty streets of Johannesburg, the familiar faces of neighbors and friends, the warmth of my own bed. I thought of Zanil as a child, her laughter ringing through our small house, the way she used to cling to my hand when storms came. I thought of Saifo, strong and steady, the man who had promised to care for my daughter. And I wondered how this place, so cold and indifferent, had become their new world. Despite the chill and the distance, I held on to hope. I imagined the moment I would finally see my grandchild, the tiny fingers curling around mine, the soft breath against my cheek. I told myself that this was just the waiting, the quiet before the storm of new life. I told myself that soon, everything would be different. But as the day wore on, the hospital's coldness seeped deeper into my bones. The smiles were few, the words sparse. I was a visitor in a place where visitors were not always welcome, a grandmother who had crossed the world only to find herself on the outside looking in. Yet even in that loneliness, I clung to the love that had brought me here, a fragile flame flickering against the cold night. When night fell, I returned to my hotel room, the city lights casting long shadows across the walls. I sat by the window, watching the world move on without me, and whispered prayers for my daughter and the child she carried. I promised that no matter what happened, I would not give up. I would find a way to be part of this story, no matter how distant or difficult it might be. In that quiet, unfamiliar room, I made a vow, to hold on to hope, to remember who I was, and to prepare myself for whatever lay ahead. For I was Standing Becky, a grandmother born of strength and love, ready to face the cold and the unknown for the family I cherished. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the city outside still cloaked in a pale, uncertain light. The weight of anticipation settled heavy on my chest. Today was the day. I had been told that Zanil's labor was expected to begin soon. My heart fluttered with a mixture of hope and nervousness as I dressed carefully, choosing the warmest clothes I had brought. I wanted to be ready for whatever this day would bring. I made my way back to the hospital, the cold air biting at my cheeks as I walked through the quiet streets. The city felt less intimidating in the soft morning light, but the hospital remained an imposing, unyielding presence. I pushed open the automatic doors and stepped inside, greeted by the sterile scent of antiseptic and the distant hum of activity. Nurses moved briskly past me, their faces calm and businesslike, their eyes rarely meeting mine. At the reception desk, I offered a polite greeting, my voice steady despite the nervous flutter in my stomach. "Good morning," I said softly. "I'm here to be near my daughter while she's in labor. Is there a way I can be with her?" The woman behind the counter glanced at her computer screen, typing quickly before looking back at me with a neutral expression. "Visiting hours are limited," she said, her tone clipped but not unkind. Family members can wait in the designated waiting areas. You'll be directed there. I nodded, trying to keep my disappointment in check. May I at least be nearby? Perhaps in the labor ward or a room close to hers. She shook her head. I'm sorry, but for privacy and hospital policy, visitors cannot be in the labor ward. You'll be asked to wait in the family room down the hall. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. Thank you, I said, though my heart sank. She handed me a visitor's badge stamped with the hospital's logo and pointed down a narrow corridor. The family waiting room is at the end of this hall. Nurses will update you when there's news. I walked down the long corridor, the walls painted a dull, institutional blue that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. At the end, I found the waiting room, a small, windowless space with a few chairs arranged in a circle. There was no warmth here, no softness to ease the anxiety that gripped me. I sat down, hands folded tightly in my lap, trying to steady my breathing. Minutes ticked by, then hours, and the sterile silence of the room pressed down on me. The only sounds were the occasional footsteps in the hallway outside and the quiet murmur of voices I could not place. I tried to focus on the photographs I had brought, images of Zanil as a child, her bright smile frozen in time, the promise of new life still ahead. I called the nurse's station, hoping for updates, but the responses were brief and clinical. She's stable, one nurse said without looking up from her computer. Please wait here. I nodded even though no one could see me. The waiting room felt like a cage, a place where time slowed and hope mingled with helplessness. I reached out several times to Saifo's phone, but calls went unanswered or straight to voicemail. Each unanswered call felt like a small wound, a reminder that I was not part of this moment as I had imagined. Still, I held on to the hope that soon I would be called to see my daughter, to hold her hand, to welcome my grandchild into the world. I imagined the soft cries of a newborn, the warmth of a tiny body against mine, the tears of joy and exhaustion on Zanil's face. I pictured Saifo by her side, steady and strong, sharing the miracle that was about to unfold. But as the hours wore on, the reality of my situation grew clearer. I was not in the labor ward. I was not even close. I was a visitor in name only, kept at a distance by hospital rules and perhaps by unspoken wishes. The waiting room's walls seemed to close in around me, the sterile light harsh and unforgiving. In a brief moment of kindness, a young nurse offered me a cup of tea. Her smile was quick and shy, a small crack in the cold facade of the hospital. It's not much, she said softly, but it might help you feel a little better. I accepted the cup gratefully, the warmth seeping into my hands like a fragile comfort. We exchanged a few words, her voice gentle, mine trembling with gratitude. For a moment, I felt seen, recognized as more than a patient or a visitor, but as a grandmother aching to be close to her family. But then she was called away, and the room fell silent once more. I sat back in the hard chair, the cup cooling in my hands, and I allowed the loneliness to wash over me. It was a bitter, aching loneliness, the kind that seeps into bones and memories. I thought of the sacrifices I had made, the long flight, the savings spent, the years of waiting for this moment, and I felt a deep, knowing sadness. Yet beneath the sadness, a quiet strength began to stir. This was my daughter's moment, yes, but it was also mine. I had traveled across the world not just to witness a birth, but to bear witness to the love that had carried me through life. I was here, and no matter what unfolded, I would not fade into the background. I reached into my bag and pulled out my notebook, the pages still blank but ready to hold my story. I took out a pen and began to write, capturing the ache and the hope, the waiting and the watching. It was my way of holding on, of making sense of the distance between us. Hours later, a nurse appeared at the door, her expression unreadable. "There's been some progress," she said quietly. "We'll keep you informed." I nodded, clutching my notebook and the fading warmth of the tea. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it, one moment at a time. In that cold, quiet room, surrounded by strangers and silence, I held on to the fragile thread of hope. I was Standing Becky, grandmother, mother, woman, and I would not be invisible. Not today. Not ever. The hours passed slowly, the minutes stretching into an endless gray that seeped into my bones. The waiting room, with its stiff chairs and sterile walls, became a small prison where time seemed to lose meaning. I sat there, clutching my notebook, my fingers tracing the familiar lines of the pages as if they might offer some comfort or connection. But the coldness of the room was relentless, and the isolation pressed down on me like a heavy fog. I tried again to reach Zanil and Saifo on their phones, but my calls went unanswered or were met with vague assurances from the hospital staff. "She's resting," one nurse said, avoiding my eyes. "Everything is fine. Please wait here." The words were meant to soothe, but they only deepened the ache of being kept at arm's length from the very moment I had come so far to witness. The waiting room was bare, no pictures, no soft furnishings, nothing to soften the harsh fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. The chairs were hard and cold, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and worn carpeting. I was surrounded by strangers, other visitors perhaps, but none offered a smile or a word. It was as if the room existed outside of warmth, outside of family, outside of the love I had carried with me across continents. I felt the loneliness settle in, creeping quietly at first, then growing into a deep, aching presence. It was not just the physical distance from my daughter and her child, it was the emotional chasm that seemed to have opened between us without warning. The sacrifices I had made, the money saved, the long flight, the months of hopeful waiting, felt suddenly fragile, threatened by an invisible barrier I could not cross. I thought about the stories I had heard from other mothers and grandmothers, tales of labor rooms filled with laughter and tears, of hands held tightly through pain and joy. But here, in this waiting room, I was nothing more than a silent observer, excluded from the intimacy of birth by rules and perhaps by choice. I tried to imagine what Zanil was going through, the contractions, the fear, the strength it took to bring a new life into the world. I prayed for her courage and for the safety of the baby. Yet every prayer was tinged with the sharp sting of absence, of not being there to offer my hand, my voice, my love. A small kindness broke through the cold when a nurse paused at the door and offered me a cup of tea. Her smile was brief but genuine, a flicker of warmth in an otherwise impersonal place. "It's not much," she said softly, "but I thought you might like this." I accepted gratefully, the warmth of the cup a stark contrast to the chill around me. We exchanged a few words, her voice gentle, mine trembling with gratitude. She told me she understood how hard waiting could be, though she was careful not to promise anything. Her kindness was a small island in the sea of my isolation, a reminder that even in places that felt cold and distant, there were moments of human connection. But soon she was called away, swept back into the flow of hospital work, leaving me once again alone with my thoughts. The silence returned, heavier this time, filled with the weight of unspoken fears and unanswered questions. I tried to reach out to Saifo again, hoping for a word, a sign that I was not forgotten. When he finally answered, his voice was soft but distant. "Thandi," he said, "we just want a private berth. It's what Zanil wants. Please understand." The words felt like a door closing gently but firmly between us. I wanted to argue, to explain the sacrifices I had made, to remind him of the love that had carried me here. But instead, I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded silently into the phone. That conversation marked a turning point. The realization sank in slowly but surely, my presence was not truly wanted in this moment. Despite everything, despite the miles traveled and the dreams held close, I was to remain on the outside, watching from a distance. The room felt colder still, the walls pressing in, the chair beneath me unforgiving. I closed my eyes and let the tears come, quietly at first, then with a force that surprised me. The grief was for the loss of connection, for the brokenness of family ties stretched thin by distance and choice. But even in that grief, a flicker of resolve began to grow. I was more than a visitor, more than a name on a list. I was a grandmother, a woman who had lived through storms and sunshine, who had loved fiercely and endured quietly. I would not let this moment define me or diminish the love I held. I opened my notebook again and began to write, pouring the pain and the hope onto the pages. Writing became my refuge, a way to hold on to my story when the world around me seemed intent on silencing it. I wrote about the cold waiting room, the unanswered calls, the bittersweet kindness of a nurse's smile. I wrote about the love that had brought me here and the loneliness that threatened to undo it. As the hours slipped by, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and strength. The hospital might keep me at a distance, but my heart was with Zenil, with the child about to enter the world, with the family I had fought so hard to support. I held on to that love fiercely, a quiet fire burning against the cold. And in that quiet, isolated room, I made a promise to myself, that no matter how this day unfolded, I would find a way to be part of the story, not just as a visitor, but as a grandmother whose love could not be confined by walls or distance. I was Standing Becky, a woman shaped by sacrifice and love, and I would not be invisible. Not now. Not ever. The waiting room grew colder as the day slipped further into evening. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow on the pale walls and the few plastic chairs that lined the corners. Outside, the city's pulse slowed, but inside this small, windowless space, time seemed to stretch endlessly, dragging with it a growing weight of loneliness and uncertainty. I sat motionless, my hands folded tightly in my lap, feeling the ache of isolation settle deep within me. The sterile air smelled faintly of antiseptic and old carpet, a scent that seemed to swallow any trace of warmth or comfort. The quiet was oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of hospital machinery and the muted footsteps of nurses passing in the hall. Each passing hour seemed to erode a little more of my hope. I tried to imagine what was happening just beyond the walls, my daughter, Zenil, breathing through contractions, gathering strength in the labor room. I pictured the new life about to come into the world, the fragile, miraculous moment I had dreamed of for so long. But despite these images, a cold reality pressed down on me. I was separated by more than just hospital policy. I was a stranger in a place meant for family. I reached for my phone again, desperate for any sign, any word. But the screen stayed dark, unanswered calls piling up like stones on my heart. I left messages for Saifo, for Zenil, pleading softly to be kept informed, to be included in the small way I could be. Each silence that followed felt like a rejection, a reminder that my presence was not only unwanted but unacknowledged. The room around me felt indifferent, even hostile. I was surrounded by strangers whose eyes slid past me without recognition, whose conversations didn't include me, whose world carried on as if I were invisible. The contrast with the warmth of my home in Johannesburg was stark. There, family gatherings were loud, full of laughter and shared stories, of hands held and tears wiped away. Here, I was alone. A nurse passed through the door, her expression neutral, her footsteps brisk. I offered a tentative smile and a polite greeting, but it was met with a quick nod and averted eyes. Moments later, she returned with a small cup of tea, her kindness brief but genuine. "It's not much," she said softly, placing the cup in my hands, "but I thought you might need this." The warmth seeped into my fingers, a fragile comfort in the cold room. We exchanged a few words, her voice gentle, mine trembling with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. For a fleeting moment, I felt seen, recognized not as a mere visitor but as a grandmother bearing the weight of hope and hurt. But then she was called away, swept back into the hospital's relentless rhythm, leaving me once again in the silence. The hours dragged on, and I found myself battling waves of emotion, loneliness, frustration, sadness. I thought about the sacrifices I had made to be here, the months of saving money, the long flight across continents, the dreams I held tightly of cradling my grandchild. Yet now, I was confined to this waiting room, barred from the very moment I had traveled so far to share. I closed my eyes and let the tears come, quietly at first, then with a force that surprised me. The grief was for the loss of connection, for the distance that felt unbridgeable, for the family I longed to be part of but was kept apart from. I thought of Zanil's childhood, the way she used to run to me with open arms, the laughter we shared. And I felt a sharp pang of absence. Despite the sorrow, a quiet resolve began to grow within me. I was more than a visitor in this hospital, I was a grandmother whose love transcended walls and silences. I would not let this moment define me or break the bonds that tied me to my family. I reached for my notebook and began to write, pouring the ache and the hope onto the pages. Writing became my anchor, a way to hold on to my story when the world around me seemed intent on erasing it. I wrote about the cold waiting room, the unanswered calls, the fleeting kindness of a nurse's smile. I wrote about the sacrifices, the dreams, the love that had carried me here. Each word was a testament to my presence, a quiet rebellion against invisibility. As night fell, the hospital transformed. The corridors grew quieter, the bustle of the day replaced by a hushed stillness. The waiting room remained, a small island of solitude in the vast, impersonal place. I wrapped my coat tighter around myself, the fabric a thin shield against the chill. In the darkness, I thought about the future, the moments yet to come, the family I would continue to love from afar or near. I promised myself that I would find strength in this experience, that I would carry the love I held for Zanil and her child with dignity and grace. I was Standing Becky, a grandmother shaped by sacrifice and love, and even in this cold, lonely waiting room, my heart remained warm with hope. The next morning dawned cold and grey, the kind of day where the sky hangs low and heavy, pressing down on everything below. I was still in the waiting room, the sterile walls closing in around me like a silent reminder of my place here, outside the birth, outside the family, outside the moment I had dreamed of for so long. The hours of waiting had worn me down, but I knew I could not give in to despair. I needed answers. With a steadying breath, I rose from the hard plastic chair and approached the nurse's station. The faces around me were busy, focused on tasks I could not see, their eyes barely registering my presence. I cleared my throat softly and asked, "May I speak with someone about my daughter's condition? I am her mother, and I would like to know how she is." A young nurse looked up from her computer, her expression polite but guarded. "I understand your concern," she said carefully, "but I'm afraid the family has requested privacy during the delivery. We can't share details without their permission." The words fell like a cold stone in my chest. "But I'm family," I said quietly, "and I've traveled all this way to be here." She hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry, but those are the instructions we have. I can tell you that everything is proceeding normally, but beyond that, I'm afraid I can't say more." I nodded, biting back the frustration swelling inside me. It was clear now, my presence here was limited not just by hospital policy but by the wishes of my own daughter and son-in-law. I tried to understand their perspective, but the pain of exclusion was sharp and raw. Later, I managed to reach Saifo on the phone. His voice was calm but firm. "Thandi, we appreciate you being here, but Zanil and I want this to be a private experience. It's what she wants. I hope you can respect that." I wanted to argue, to remind him of the sacrifices I had made, the journey I had undertaken, the love that had carried me across continents. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I whispered, "I understand," though my heart ached. I spent the day in a haze of quiet reflection, trying to reconcile the reality before me with the dreams I had held so tightly. I thought about the cultural differences that stretched between us, the ways families express love and support, the boundaries they set. I realized that perhaps what was normal for me was not for them, that the desire for privacy was as much about their new life as it was about the birth itself. Still, the rejection stung deeply. I was a mother and a grandmother, yet I felt invisible, sidelined in the most sacred moment of our family's life. The sacrifices I made seemed to vanish into the cold hospital air, swallowed by silence and distance. But in the quiet moments, I reminded myself of my worth beyond this day. My love for Zanil and her child was not diminished by absence or exclusion. I had been a pillar in their lives long before this moment, and I would continue to be, no matter what. I returned to my notebook and began to write again, pouring out the complex emotions swirling inside me: hurt, understanding, hope, and resilience. Writing became my way of processing, of reclaiming a sense of control when so much felt uncertain. I also took photos of the waiting room, the bare walls, the empty chairs, the dim lighting. Each image was a testament to my experience, a silent witness to the invisible struggle I faced. I knew these images might one day tell a story beyond words, one that demanded recognition and empathy. As the day drew to a close, I sat by the window of my hotel room, watching the city lights twinkle against the night sky. I thought about what it meant to be family, not just in presence but in spirit. And I vowed to hold on to that spirit fiercely. I was Standing Becky, a grandmother shaped by love and resilience. Though I was kept at a distance today, my heart remained close to my daughter and the new life she brought into the world. And that love, I knew, would endure beyond any barriers set before me. In the quiet moments that followed the long day, I found myself sinking into reflection. The sterile hospital walls and the cold waiting room faded into the background as memories flooded my mind, memories of a life filled with love, hardship, and resilience. I was more than the loneliness I felt in this distant city. I was a woman shaped by decades of strength and sacrifice, a matriarch who had nurtured generations. I thought back to the small house in Johannesburg where Zanil had grown up, the laughter that once filled the rooms, the stories shared around the kitchen table. I remembered the nights I sat by her bedside when she was sick, the victories and failures we had weathered together. Those moments were the foundation of our bond, far deeper than any physical presence could capture. Though today I was kept apart, I knew my role in this family's story was far from over. Love, I realized, transcended walls and waiting rooms. It was an unbreakable thread woven through time, binding us even when distance and silence threatened to unravel it. With that thought, I opened my notebook and began to write again, not just to document pain or exclusion, but to celebrate the enduring bonds that define me. I wrote about my journey here, the sacrifices made and the hopes held close. I wrote about the strength that comes from love, resilience, and faith in the unseen connections that bind us. I also began to take photographs of the waiting room, the hospital's cold corridors, and the city outside my window. Each image was a visual poem, capturing the stark contrast between the loneliness I felt and the love I carried within. These pictures became a silent testament to my experience, a way to claim my truth when words sometimes fell short. Through writing and photography, I found a new strength rising within me. I was no longer just a visitor or an outsider, I was a storyteller, a keeper of memories and emotions that deserved to be seen and heard. This was my way of reclaiming agency in a situation that had left me feeling powerless. At night, when the city's lights twinkled against the dark sky, I reflected on the lessons life had taught me. I had learned that love sometimes requires patience and understanding, that family is not always defined by proximity but by commitment and care. I vowed to hold on to that wisdom, knowing it would guide me through the challenges ahead. Though I longed to hold my grandchild, to feel the warmth of their tiny hand in mine, I understood that love could take many forms. I could nurture this new life from afar, through prayers, stories, and the quiet strength of a grandmother's heart. I was Standing Becky, a woman forged by love and resilience. This journey, though fraught with pain and distance, had deepened my understanding of family and self. And as I prepared for the days to come, I held on to the unshakable truth that my love, though sometimes unseen, was a powerful force that would endure beyond any barriers set before me. In the days that followed, I found myself compelled to share my experience beyond the walls of that cold waiting room. The ache of exclusion and the depths of my love could not remain silent, confined to pages in a notebook or the quiet corners of a hotel room. I wanted others to understand, family, friends, even strangers, that sometimes love is complicated, stretched thin by distance and difference, and that boundaries, though painful, are part of the human story. I began by posting my reflections on social media, writing candidly about the journey I had undertaken, the sacrifices made to be present for Zenil's birth, and the unexpected isolation I faced. I shared some of the photographs I had taken, the bare waiting room, the empty chairs, the shadows that seemed to echo my feelings. I wanted to paint a picture not just of loneliness but of resilience and hope. The response was swift and varied. Messages of sympathy and support poured in from close friends and distant relatives alike. Some shared their own stories of family complexities, of love tangled with boundaries and misunderstandings. They offered words of comfort and encouragement, reminding me that I was not alone in navigating these difficult waters. Others, however, were less understanding. A few criticized my decision to share such private moments publicly, suggesting that family matters should stay behind closed doors. Some dismissed my feelings entirely, insisting that I should accept the choices Zenil and Saifo had made without question. Their voices stung, a reminder that not everyone sees pain or love in the same way. But rather than silence me, these varied reactions sparked a wider conversation, one about the nature of family, respect, and cultural differences in an increasingly global world. Friends I had not spoken to in years reached out, eager to discuss the delicate balance between honoring personal wishes and embracing extended family. I found solace in these dialogues, realizing that my story was part of a larger tapestry of experiences shared by many. The complexities of love and boundaries cross continents and generations, shaping how we connect and care for one another. Through this sharing, I also began to reclaim my own narrative. No longer was I just the isolated grandmother waiting in a hospital room, I was a woman who had journeyed across the world, who had loved fiercely and endured quietly, who had found strength in vulnerability and voice in silence. My story mattered. In the quiet moments, I continued to write and photograph, documenting not only my pain but the lessons learned and the hope that remained. These acts became a form of healing, a way to process the tangled emotions and to prepare myself for whatever lay ahead. I knew that the path toward reconciliation and understanding would be long and uncertain. But by speaking my truth and opening my heart, I had taken the first step toward bridging the distance, not just between me and my family but within myself. I was Standing Becky, a grandmother whose love transcended borders and boundaries. My story was not just one of exclusion but of resilience, connection, and the enduring power of family, however imperfect and complicated it might be. A few days after sharing my story online, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my daughter's name, Zenil. My heart pounded as I answered, nerves and hope tangled together in my chest. "Thandi," she began, her voice soft, hesitant. "I've read your posts. I'm sorry if we hurt you. It wasn't our intention. Saifo and I wanted a private birth, but I didn't think it would make you feel excluded like this." Her words were gentle but heavy with regret, and I could hear the fatigue just beneath her tone, the exhaustion of childbirth, the pressure of new motherhood, and perhaps the weight of guilt. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Zenil, I understand why you wanted privacy. I want what's best for you and the baby. But I need you to know how painful it was for me, to travel all this way and be kept apart from you when I wanted to support you the most." There was a pause, and I could almost feel her absorbing my words. Then she spoke again. "I didn't realize how much it meant to you, Mom. I was so focused on what I wanted that I forgot how it would affect you. I'm sorry. Can we start fresh? I want you to be part of this child's life. Her apology softened the ache I'd carried, and though my heart was still tender, I found room for forgiveness. Thank you, Zanil. I want that too. We have a lot to rebuild, but I believe we can. Over the next few days, our conversations grew more frequent and open. We talked about boundaries, respect, and the ways our lives had changed with distance and time. I shared my feelings honestly, and she listened without defensiveness. Saifo joined a call once, his voice warm as he expressed his gratitude for my support and apologized for any hurt caused. The slow rebuilding of trust was fragile but real. I learned to accept that family dynamics evolve, that love sometimes requires patience and understanding as much as presence. We began planning visits, video calls, and moments to share despite the miles between us. Through these conversations, I saw a new side of Zanil, her vulnerability, her desire to heal, and her commitment to making space for me and the new grandchild. I felt my role shift from a distant observer to an active participant in this extended family story. The journey was not without its challenges. Old wounds surfaced, and misunderstandings lingered. But each step forward was a testament to the strength of our bond and the love that endured despite the obstacles. I reflected on my own growth, how this experience had deepened my understanding of family's complexities and the importance of communication. I realized that forgiveness was not just for others but for myself, to release the pain and embrace the future with hope. I was standing Becky, a grandmother who had weathered storms of distance and silence to find a path toward reconciliation. Though the road ahead was uncertain, I held on to the promise of renewed connection and the enduring power of love to heal even the deepest divides. I returned to Johannesburg with a heart both heavy and hopeful, carrying the weight of my journey and the fragile threads of reconciliation I had begun to weave. The city welcomed me back with its familiar rhythms, the warm sun filtering through jacaranda trees, the chatter of neighbors in the streets, the scent of fresh bread from the corner bakery. Yet beneath the comfort of home, I carried a new awareness of the complexities that family life could hold. In the days that followed, I settled back into the life I had paused, a life filled with routine and memories, but now also with a deeper understanding of resilience and grace. I thought often of my grandchild, a new life blossoming miles away, and I promised myself to cherish that bond in ways beyond physical presence. I would be a grandmother not just in proximity, but in spirit, through stories, prayers, and the steadfast love that transcends distance. The experience had taught me that family was not always about closeness or ceremony, but about respect for boundaries and the courage to love through imperfection. I found strength in embracing these lessons, knowing they would shape the legacy I left for my children and grandchildren. I continued to write, to capture the journey in words and images, preserving the truths of my experience for myself and for those who might one day walk a similar path. These stories became a testament to endurance, to the power of love to persist even when tested by silence and separation. Though the scars of exclusion lingered, they no longer defined me. Instead, I chose to focus on the bridges being built, the tentative steps toward understanding and forgiveness that promised new beginnings. I remained open to the evolving relationship with my daughter and her family, ready to embrace the joys and challenges that lay ahead. In quiet moments, I would look at photographs of the waiting room, the hospital corridors, the city that had been both a place of hope and heartache. They reminded me of the journey, the trials faced and the growth achieved. And I hung one framed photograph in my living room, a symbol of strength and dignity, a reminder that even in invisibility, I had found my voice. I was standing Becky, a grandmother who had crossed oceans not just in miles but in spirit. My legacy would not be measured solely by presence but by the resilience to love fiercely, to forgive, and to hold space for family in all its complexity. This was the gift I would pass on, a testament that true connection comes from the heart, enduring beyond distance, boundaries, and time.